Students often ask me how to write a good abstract, and this is a question that keeps coming up again and again. And so I thought I would devote a video to this. Okay, so first let's look at the idea of what is an abstract. An abstract is a condensed version of an article, something that's used to find out what the article is about. So it is essentially a glimpse of the article and what's in it. And people use it to find out whether they're interested in this article, whether they want to spend the time to read it, or quite often when they're cataloging larger amount of material, instead of having to read the whole article, they can use the abstract to find out where it belongs within their categorization. From the point of view of the person who is writing the abstract, I think one of the primary applications is when you intend to participate in a conference and you're asked to submit an abstract. So in these cases, you determine what you're going to talk about, what your presentation will be about. And this happens quite often before you actually write your presentation. So you're kind of gauging what you're going to be talking about, but of course you probably don't even know the results. Another time when you use the abstract is when you submit your article to a journal for peer review. Journals will typically ask for an abstract of the article, and in these cases you write the abstract after you've finished writing the paper. And so the journal may use the abstract to find out whether it even fits their profile. So it is clear that this kind of abstract would be different because you have written the paper, and so you're trying to condense everything you have written into a short abstract. And of course there's your dissertation abstract, which is typically expected to be a little bit longer, but still nevertheless is a condensed form of what you're talking about in the dissertation. Okay, so let's look at it from the point of view of the reader. And this is important because actually this is going to be read by somebody. And so you want to cater as much as possible to this imaginary reader. So what does a good abstract look like?
Well, the abstract, in my view, should give you the results of your work. Not so much the questions that you ask, but actually also the findings and what does it result in and what have you found. And it should in that sense cover the outcome of research, but in a way that it also is enticing and that it brings you in and you wish to understand better what is expressed in terms of ideas and outcomes in that particular article or book or whatever you want to shorten in an abstract.
And having thought about it a little bit, I think I can condense it into 4 points. Point number 1 is that it has to be succinct, and that means that it has to be brief and to the point. The abstract is not the place to introduce new material or anything like that. It's really about explaining what your paper or presentation is in a few lines. So ideally, I would say an abstract should not be less than, say, 6-7 lines of text, and maybe not longer than about half a page. I typically write abstracts that are about a third of a page. Quite often the organizers of the conference or the journal will specify the number of words you can use in an abstract. So it can be 150 or 200, sometimes even up to 300. And so you should respect these requirements and write your abstract accordingly. And remember, the point of the abstract is that it's a brief description of what's in your presentation or your article. Point number 2, that it has to be informative. That is, it has to communicate to the reader what your article is about. So again, this is not the place to be wishy-washy about it. You have to write down what your main point of the article is. Don't be vague and do not leave cliffhangers. You have to be able to communicate what the point is of your article. Otherwise, people are not going to read it. Point number 3, it has to be truthful. And by that, I mean that you cannot make claims that are not actually in your article. You cannot make claims like, I'm going to change our perspective on something, and maybe you wanted to do that, but in your article you did not do that, so don't say that. This problem usually arises when you write your article beforehand. Say when you're submitting it to the organizers of a conference, that is going to happen a year from now. So in those cases, I think it makes sense to ask the organizers to update your abstract so it actually reflects what your presentation is about. And finally, point number 4, that it has to be enticing. Okay, this is not a great requirement, but I think it's very useful if your article communicates your ideas in a way that makes people want to read them. And maybe you think your subject is not that enticing, but then you actually have a problem because you have to communicate your research in a way that it's actually worth reading. And probably you were passionate about doing this research and then writing it up. So you have to communicate some of that passion and entice your readers to want to read it. Okay, so these are the 4 points I could think of now. And if you think about it, the initials of these 4 points spell out the word site, S-I-T-E. It's easy to remember this way, and so you can always think about what S meant, what I meant, and so forth. And finally, just a few pointers about how your abstract should look like. So generally, I think you have to communicate several points. Your first point from sentence 1 should be about a phenomenon or a problem in your field, something that you're going to solve. And your second point is how people in the past or currently are approaching this problem and how they are not solving it or how they're solving it in the wrong way. And the third point is how you're going to do it differently. And here perhaps you can mention your methodology, how you're doing something differently from everyone else. And point 4 is what your results are, how you change our perception of something or how you solve a problem. And finally, at the end, I think it's always useful to add something about the implications, connecting this problem to the wider world or to other disciplines. And so this way, at the very end, you open up the results of your research for a much wider readership. Okay, so these are my points on how you write a good abstract. Hope this was useful. Thank you for watching and see you next time.